My parents had a broken marriage and decided to kick me out of the house because they did not want their biggest mistake living with them. But now they want me back after 6 months because my grandparents put forward the condition that they take me back or inheritance goes to charity. Growing up, my parents' marriage was nothing short of a nightmare. They were incompatible right from the start and would clash frequently. Imagine those volatile high school relationships where couples are constantly breaking up and getting back together, but my parents, instead of being able to walk away, were stuck in the same house, bound by marriage. They couldn't escape each other, and neither could I. From the moment I came into this world, I was plunged into an environment where screaming, shouting, and physical altercations were the norm. Their arguments would often start over something trivial, maybe a minor disagreement or a small misunderstanding, but the tension would escalate quickly into a full-blown war. It wasn't uncommon for these fights to become physical, with them hitting each other or throwing objects across the room. The sound of glass shattering or a heavy object slamming against the wall became as familiar to me as the loud sound of the TV playing in the background. As a young child, I could never understand why my parents were so angry with each other. All I knew was that their fights terrified me. Whenever they started yelling, my instinct was to cry. It was the only way I knew how to express the fear and confusion that their anger caused. But my cries for comfort or for them to stop were only met with more anger. They would turn their rage on me, shouting at me to stop crying. As a result, I quickly learned that my emotions were not safe to express, that even my fear and sadness were unwelcome in my own home. Hence, I stopped feeling safe around my own parents. The two people who were supposed to protect me and make me feel secure were the very ones who made me feel the most vulnerable and afraid. I couldn't trust them to keep me safe because they couldn't even keep themselves from hurting each other. As I grew older, I developed coping mechanisms to shield myself from the chaos. Whenever the fights began, I would retreat to the nearest safe space I could find, usually my bedroom or a bathroom, any place where I could lock the door and put some distance between myself and their fury. In those small enclosed spaces, I would try to drown out the sounds of their fighting, sometimes covering my ears or burying my head under a pillow. Fortunately, things began to change when my maternal grandparents stepped in. They had been quietly observing the destructive pattern of my parents' relationship for years, and I think they finally reached a breaking point. Realizing how deeply my parents' constant fighting was affecting me, they decided to take action. My grandparents, along with other concerned family members, organized an intervention, a moment where everyone came together to confront the situation head-on. During this intervention, my parents were given an ultimatum: either they seek professional help through marriage counseling, or they separate. For the first time, it felt like someone was truly seeing the damage that their relationship was causing, not just to themselves but to me as well. The intervention wasn't just about saving their marriage, it was also about saving me from the ongoing emotional turmoil. My family made it clear that the toxic environment was taking a severe toll on my mental health and that something had to change. Reluctantly at first, but eventually with some hesitation, my parents agreed to start marriage counseling. The process was slow and often painful for them, but over time, we could see that it was making a difference. The intense, explosive fights between my parents became less frequent, and when disagreements did arise, they were more controlled, more focused on communicating rather than attacking each other. It was as if they were slowly learning a new language, one of understanding and respect instead of anger and blame. Gradually, our home became a quieter place, not filled with constant tension and fear that had been the norm for so long. However, as their relationship began to improve, I started noticing something that left me feeling confused and a little hurt. My parents seemed to be pulling away from me. Even before, amidst their chaos, there had been some semblance of involvement in my daily life. My mom used to make breakfast for me, and my dad would drop me off at school, small gestures that showed they were still taking care of me in their own way. But as they focused more on repairing their marriage, these gestures began to disappear. Suddenly, my mom stopped waking up early and making me breakfast. My dad no longer insisted on driving me to school and would make excuses that he was too busy. Instead, they would hand me some money and tell me to take the bus or buy lunch if I needed it. It was a strange and unsettling experience. On one hand, I was relieved that the fighting had lessened and that our home was no longer a battleground, but on the other hand, I felt a new kind of loneliness. I understood that they were going through a lot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left behind, that in their attempt to fix what was broken between them, they had somehow forgotten about me. As time went on, my parents' focus on their relationship continued to grow, but it seemed to come at the expense of their relationship with me. They started going out more often, just the two of them, leaving me behind. They would head out for dinners or date nights, something they had never done before, and I was left at home, told to eat whatever leftovers I could find in the fridge. They also stopped asking me about my grades or showing any interest in how I was doing at school. I remember the few times I would excitedly share some good news about a grade I had worked hard for, hoping to get a smile or a word of praise. Instead, they would respond with indifference, barely acknowledging what I had said before turning back to their own conversation. When my 15th birthday was approaching, I wanted to have a celebration with my close friends. Up until that year, I had never been allowed to celebrate my birthday, and I had always just accepted it, never really pushing back. But this time, I was determined to have a party, to feel like a normal teenager for once. I worked up the courage to ask my parents if I could finally have a birthday party. My dad flatly refused, and my mom dismissed the idea completely, telling me that I needed to stop finding ways to waste more of their money. Her words cut deep, making me feel like I was a burden, like I didn't deserve to ask for anything. She continued to say how instead of asking for more things, I should find ways to repay them back for all the money they had spent on me over the years. Normally, I would have let it go, swallowed my disappointment, and retreated into myself like I had so many times before. But something in me snapped. I was sad, frustrated, and filled with a kind of anger I hadn't felt before. Maybe it was my teenage hormones, or maybe it was the accumulation of years of feeling neglected, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I yelled at them, telling them that they had never really done anything for me apart from giving birth and that they had never made me feel loved or cared for. I told them how it wasn't my responsibility to give them back anything and asked them why they even had me in the first place if they resented me so much. Hearing my outburst, my mother, who had never laid a hand on me before, slapped me hard across the face. The sting of her hand on my cheek was sharp and shocking, but her words were even more painful. She told me that I had no right to speak to them like that I should be grateful just to be alive, and that I was lucky they had done as much as they had for me. I could feel my tears welling up. I turned to my dad, hoping he would step in, hoping he would defend me or at least comfort me, but he only shook his head, disappointment etched across his face. He told me that I was getting older now and it was time for me to grow up and learn to behave properly. He said I shouldn't be fighting with them over something as trivial as a birthday party and that I was acting like an immature child. Their words crushed me. It was clear to me then that, in their eyes, my feelings, my desires didn't matter. That night, I cried myself to sleep, feeling more alone than I ever had before. In the days following my outburst, the atmosphere at home grew even more tense. My mother never apologized for slapping me, and there was no acknowledgement of the pain or hurt I had expressed. It was as if that night had never happened. My parents now seemed to go out of their way to avoid any interaction at all. They wouldn't speak to me unless absolutely necessary, and even then, their words were curt and cold. A week later, my dad called me into the living room. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Both he and my mom were sitting there, looking grim and serious. My heart sank as I prepared myself for another round of scolding. I could feel the anxiety building up inside me as I took a seat, wondering what I had done this time. I couldn't even meet their eyes, dreading whatever was coming next. Before I could say anything, my dad started to speak. His tone was measured, but there was an edge to it that made me nervous. He said that they had been thinking a lot since our last conversation, and that both he and my mom felt that their marriage was almost perfect now. He told me how they both had worked really hard to reach a place where they were finally happy together. But then he paused, and what he said next shook me to my core. He continued, saying that there was still one major issue standing in the way of their happiness, one big mistake that they needed to address in order to truly move forward towards a happy marriage. My dad then looked me in the eyes and said I was the mistake in their life. I sat there frozen, trying to comprehend what he was saying. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that it almost didn't register at first. He continued to say that they believed their marriage could be absolutely perfect if not for the burden of raising me. As I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, my mother jumped in, her voice sharp and laced with bitterness. She said that having me around the house was a constant reminder of how much they disliked me and that I was the reason they had almost gotten divorced. My dad explained that they had me when they were young and didn't really have a choice in the matter. Over the years, they had grown to detest the role of being parents, but neither of them had been able to admit it to the other. Their unspoken resentment, he said, was the root of many of their fights. He went on to tell me that after they started going to counseling, both of them quickly realized that they shared the same feelings of dislike towards me, their own child. They had then tried to salvage their marriage by emotionally distancing themselves from me, but apparently, that wasn't enough. My recent rebellious behavior had been the final straw for them. It had made them realize just how much of an inconvenience I was in their lives. They wanted to start fresh and to live their lives without being reminded of what they now saw as the biggest regret of their relationship. I sat there, paralyzed by the weight of their words, as if time had slowed down and everything around me had lost its meaning. The people who had raised me, who had always been the center of my world, had just torn apart everything I thought I understood about love, family, and belonging. As if this wasn't enough, my mother then went on to announce that they wanted me to move in with my grandparents soon. She continued almost nonchalantly, saying that if my grandparents didn't want to take me in, just in case, then I would have to figure something out on my own, whether that meant living with a friend or fending for myself. She didn't seem to care. The way she said it, so detached and indifferent, made it clear that she and my father were done with me. They had already moved on in their minds, erasing me from their lives as if I had never existed. I looked at them, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint that they might change their minds. But all I saw were cold, resolute expressions. There was no love in their eyes, no compassion, nothing that even remotely resembled the parents I had desperately longed for all these years. I was devastated, shattered by the realization that the people who brought me into this world, who were supposed to love and protect me, had decided that I was disposable. That evening, I sat reeling in my room after this entire conversation. I still couldn't believe that they had asked me, still a minor, to leave the house. They expected me to fend for myself and to find my own way because they were done. Done with me, done with the responsibilities of parenthood, done with the mistake they claimed had ruined their marriage. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was overwhelmed with disbelief and pain, struggling to process the fact that my own parents were abandoning me, casting me aside as if I were nothing. When my mother informed her parents of their decision to kick me out, my grandparents immediately came to my rescue. The moment they arrived, I could see the fury in my grandmother's eyes. She was livid, practically shaking with anger over what my parents were doing to me. Her voice, usually so gentle, was sharp and fierce as she confronted my mother, demanding to know how she could do something so heartless. My dad tried to justify their actions, arguing that they never wanted me in the first place and had only kept me because of my grandparents' insistence. He told them that since they cared so much about me, it was now their responsibility to take me in. The way he spoke about me, as though I were just an obligation they had been forced to endure, cut through me like a knife. But my grandparents didn't back down. My grandfather, calm but firm, turned to me and told me to pack my clothes and gather all my important documents. I was in a daze as I stumbled back to my room, tears streaming down my face as I hastily shoved my belongings into a bag, my hands trembling. I couldn't stop crying. The thought of leaving the only home I had ever known was tearing me apart. I knew I was lucky to have my grandparents there to take me in, but it didn't lessen the pain of being rejected by my own parents. With every item I packed, I prayed that my parents would change their minds, that they would come to their senses and realize what they were doing. I wanted so desperately for them to stop me, to tell me that they had made a mistake, that they loved me and wanted me to stay. But no such words came. When I finally walked out, my grandparents were there, ready to help me carry my things. I glanced back at my parents, hoping for some sign of regret or hesitation, but they didn't even look up. They sat at the kitchen table, holding each other's hands, ignoring me. The sight of them sitting there, united in their decision, broke what little was left of my heart. It was at that moment that I realized that my parents only cared about each other, and they had chosen to hold on to their relationship at the expense of their own child. Those first few weeks after I moved into my grandparents' house were some of the darkest days of my life. Every night, I was haunted by nightmares about my parents, terrifying dreams that left me waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, tears streaming down my face. I would lie there, shivering in the darkness, unable to shake the overwhelming sadness that came from being abandoned by my own parents. I also started falling ill frequently, my body reflecting the trauma I was going through. My grandfather, worried about my health, took me to see a doctor. After a few examinations, the doctor gently explained that the stress I was under was taking a serious toll on my mental health. The weight of my emotions was manifesting in physical ways, breaking me down little by little. I could feel myself slipping further into a pit of despair. I stopped taking care of myself, eating irregularly and losing interest in everything that had once mattered to me. My grades at school began to plummet. I missed my parents so much that it hurt. I kept hoping, wishing that they would call me, that they would realize they had made a mistake and take me back. But the phone never rang. In moments of desperation, I would try to call them myself, clinging to the hope that hearing my voice might remind them that I still existed, that I was still their child. But each time, they ignored my calls, letting them go unanswered. I would send my mother texts, pouring my heart out, begging her to come and take me back home, but all she would do was leave me on read. Her silence was a cruel reminder of how little I now meant to her. The weeks dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I was living in misery, my heart breaking a little more each day as I grappled with the reality that my parents had truly left me on my own. Then, one day, as my grandmother was combing my hair, something she did to comfort me, to try and bring some normalcy back into my life, she suddenly broke down in tears. She cried openly, her hands trembling as she held the brush. Through her sobs, she told me how much she wished I didn't have to go through this, how she and my grandfather just wanted to see me happy again. Watching my grandmother cry, I felt a pang of guilt and a wave of realization wash over me. Here was someone who loved me deeply, who was hurting just as much as I was, if not more, because she couldn't take my pain away. At that moment, I understood that I couldn't keep letting myself fall apart. My parents weren't coming back, they had made their choice and moved on. As much as it broke my heart to accept it, I knew I had to make peace with that truth. I realized then that I needed to start picking up the pieces of my life, not just for myself but for my grandparents too. They had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go, and they were doing everything they could to help me heal. They deserved to see me try, to see me fight to rebuild my life. From that day forward, I resolved to take it one step at a time. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the sadness felt overwhelming and when I missed my parents so much it felt like I couldn't breathe, but I knew I had to keep moving forward, for my sake and for the sake of the people who still cared about me. My grandparents had become my lifeline, and I owed it to them and to myself to try to find a way back to happiness. Over the months, I slowly began to shift my focus from the overwhelming sadness of losing my parents to the small, positive things that were starting to happen in my life. For example, my grandmother makes me breakfast every morning. She has this adorable habit of spreading ketchup on my toast in the shape of a smiley face. It is such a simple gesture, but it makes me feel cared for in a way I've never felt before. My grandfather is a stickler for neatness and believes that a crumpled shirt is a poor reflection of one's character. Hence, every morning, he irons my clothes for school with such precision that I look sharp and put together when I leave for school. Living with my grandparents has also brought new freedoms that I had never experienced before. For the first time, I'm allowed to participate in after-school activities, something my parents had never permitted. Now, I have joined clubs and sports teams and made new friends. Weekends have become something I look forward to as well. My grandparents always encouraged me to hang out with my friends, something that had always been limited before. I'm finally able to go out, have fun, and just be a teenager without the constant feeling of being judged. As time has gone on, I found myself thinking less and less about my parents. The pain is still there, of course, but it doesn't consume me like it used to. My grandparents have successfully created an environment where I feel safe, valued, and loved. Slowly but surely, their home has become my home. It's been 6 months now since I moved out of my parents' place. Other relatives from both my mother's and father's sides have continued to visit me regularly. Word quickly spread through the family about what my parents had done, and the shock and anger were almost universal. One by one, everyone has cut off contact with my parents after confronting them about their decision to abandon me. Sometimes I do hear bits and pieces about my parents' lives from some of my cousins. Apparently, my absence has brought them closer together. They even went on a cruise recently, enjoying the newfound peace in their marriage. Hearing that stung, but I tried to push the thoughts away. I hadn't reached out to them in months, determined to move on and focus on the life I was rebuilding with my grandparents. Then yesterday, something happened that I never expected. My phone rang, and when I glanced at the screen, I felt my heart stop. It was a call from my mom. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, a cruel trick of my mind, but no matter how many times I rubbed my eyes, the phone kept ringing. My hand trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally answered, the first thing I noticed was the sound of her breathing on the other end. It was shaky and uncertain. After what felt like an eternity of awkward silence, she spoke. Her voice was softer than I remembered, almost hesitant, as she asked how I had been doing. The question hung in the air, and I found myself unable to respond. What could I possibly say to her? That I was fine? That I was broken? That I had missed them every day and yet resented them for what they had done? I kept quiet, unsure of what to say. Then she spoke again, asking if I was free to talk because she had something important to discuss with me. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed, and it made me wonder what could possibly be so important now, after all this time. Why now, after months of silence, after they had seemingly moved on with their lives? There was so much left unsaid between us, so much hurt that had festered in the months since they kicked me out. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what she had to say, but I also had a faint, painful hope that maybe, just maybe, she was reaching out to make amends. I asked her what it was that she wanted, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotion surging inside me. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her gathering the courage to speak. Then my mom took a deep breath and asked me if I could come back home. The words I had longed to hear for so many painful months were finally being spoken, but instead of relief, all I felt was a strange, hollow sensation. She continued, saying that she and Dad regretted kicking me out and had spent time thinking things over. They wanted to make amends and have me back home. But something about her words didn't sit right with me. She didn't once actually apologize to me for everything she and Dad had put me through. Her words were rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. There was no emotion behind them, no real sense of remorse that I could feel. I told her that I didn't believe her and that it sounded like she was lying. I pointed out that if she and Dad truly regretted their actions, they wouldn't have waited 6 months to reach out. They could have easily come to my grandparents' house, knocked on the door, and asked for my forgiveness, but instead, they had been silent for half a year, living their lives without me, going on vacation, and apparently growing closer. Now, out of the blue, she was calling me, acting like everything could be fixed with a few words, as if the damage they had done could be so easily undone. I told her to stop playing with my heart, that I didn't need them anymore. They had made their choice when they kicked me out, and I had spent the last 6 months trying to rebuild my life without them. I wasn't about to let them waltz back in and pretend like nothing had happened. With that, I cut off the call. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has shown me support and reached out during this time. Since my last conversation with my mom, she has called me 3 more times, but I haven't answered any of them. My dad also sent me a message apologizing for everything and expressing how much he misses me, but it all feels too good to be true. I'm beginning to believe that others also find my parents' behavior strange, which is why I've told my grandparents about my mom's sudden call. My grandmother is now trying to find out from other relatives if they know anything about why my parents are pushing me to move back. Update 2. It turns out we were alright because the truth has finally come out. One of my relatives on my dad's side just confirmed that my paternal grandparents have drawn up a new will. My dad, being their only child, is supposed to inherit everything. However, in their new will, they've added a condition. For my dad to access the inheritance, they need my signature as well, and the money has to be equally divided between me and him. If I don't sign the papers, the entire inheritance will be donated to charity. My paternal grandparents have stayed in touch with me and, like everyone else, know how my parents abandoned me. I'm sure this is their way of trying to bring my parents and me back together. However, it's now clear that my parents only reached out to me because they're afraid of losing this inheritance if they don't continue to have a good relationship with me. It's clear they want me to move back in so that if and when my paternal grandparents pass away, I won't resist signing for the inheritance. Update 3. My maternal grandparents have since talked to my parents and warned them that we now understand their true motive for reaching out to me. My mom tried to backtrack, claiming it wasn't just about my paternal grandparents' will and that I would also benefit from the inheritance, so I should consider my future. But my grandmother wasn't swayed by her argument. She responded by telling my mother that she was no longer considered her daughter and expressed shame over how inhumane she had become. In the wake of that confrontation, I decided to block my parents. I will continue to live with my grandparents as I have for the past few months. I'm learning to accept that while my relationship with my parents may never be repaired, I have the chance to build something positive from the experience. It's definitely not the life I imagined, but it's one where I'm finally surrounded by people who genuinely care about me and want the best for me. For now, that's enough.